Hello, TESOL people. Got to liven up these talks. My hat kind of goes a bazinga, I think would fit. There's a little joke with it, but it's kind of dated to the 70s. If you know Glenn Campbell's songs, you know, he has one, I'm a Rhinestone Cowboy. You ever heard of that song if it's a Western? And I always tell people, now wear this. If you look at the flag, you recognize the country. And then the joke is, it's the German flag, and I'm a Rhineland cowboy instead of rhinestone. That's the pun. Okay, I thought I'd liven it up. I know I'm hitting you with some videos here at the start, so I'm trying to, I don't know, cover a lot of ground immediately. So you have this. I'm sending you a handout that's a glossary of ESL terms. It has a combination of some of the stuff from the programs that's on the chart, so I'm not going to go over those again. But I do have some things on BICS and CALPS and ESL and EL, and these matter in the term ESL. And BICS and CALPS, you have to know that. And I have a little comment on there, but basically BICS is Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills acronym. It means playground English or conversational English, like I'm talking to you right now and I'm talking conversationally. And so language is really two things. It's conversation, which is not academic for the most part. And then it is CALPS, which is Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency Skills. The difference being that if you grow up in any culture, you will acquire the BICS, the basic conversation. You can call it playground English, street English, just like you can say, I can speak street Spanish and stuff informal for conversation purposes. But for school or for a professional basis, you have to have mastery of the skills, reading and writing, which is basically CALPS. Another thing that I will just mention, I won't give you a chart, but most people would say that, and I've seen examples of people picking up a conversational skill, their conversational skill in English and apparently being fluent within 6 to 8 months. Not adults, but kids. But I want to tell you something. This old idea that the older you are, the less you're able to learn a language, unless you have some brain dysfunction. It's not true that you can actually learn a language. I could learn French. What happens is that when we get older, even as old as middle school, we become more uptight and unwilling to make mistakes and be embarrassed about. We don't have the desire to play with the language and to learn it and to not have an ego. I remember one time seeing a high school principal or vice principal, whatever it was, and we were trying to teach him a little basic Spanish in Lexington many years ago, and he just couldn't utter any word in Spanish. And the question would be, oh, he doesn't have the capacity. No. He resisted it. He just didn't want to. My story was that I said teaching him Spanish was like trying to teach a minister to cuss. He just won't do it. He can't do it. And this guy would just do anything but speak Spanish. He avoided it. So the issue here is that you can always learn a second language, a third language, etc. And you may not have the flexibility or the sense. You may be, your ear, you may not be quite as good at picking up sounds, but there are people that pick up music and can hear tones. They just have a natural inclination or a special skill to hear like music keys and things like that. But the fact is that you can pick up a second language. Another little rule coming out of this is that you cannot produce a sound if you can't hear it. I noticed I did a little experiment. I wanted to learn some of the sounds of the Somali language, which I was told could be It'd be an East African dialect. I'm not talking Arabic, I'm talking a tribal language. But I noticed when I tried to listen to little clips on either when I would just literally listen to people speak in Somali, I couldn't pick up one sound. I could not understand what the sounds were because they were made in ways that were very different from any sound I'd ever heard before. A good way to put this in layman's terms is if you try to speak German, or you try to speak French, or you try to roll your R's in Spanish, which can be difficult. Some people can't roll the R's. For instance, the word railroad in Spanish is ferrocarril, and it's kind of hard to say. Some people can't do that. But in German, you have I'm trying to think for the other languages. They have sounds that are difficult for you to make. You really have to focus on them. If you can't hear the sound, you can't make it. Individuals from parts of East Asia have trouble with the L and the R. Do you know why they have trouble with our L and our R? Is because they have a sound that is a combination of L and R. It sets in between where we make our L and R. And so they struggle. They have one sound that's like an L or like an R, and we tell them, no, you have to make it this way to make it sound like our L, and you have to make it this way for the R. And so you have this problem that people struggle with it. So going from one language to another, they're going to be a new set of sounds. That's a really interesting area, the whole thing, but I don't want to get off too much and talk too long because this is going to be a short video. Okay, so BICS and CALPS, also, we call them English learners now. It's been getting smaller all this time. We used to call them ESL, Limited English Proficiency, but the word limited English proficiency sounds like it's a disability or some shortcoming. Of course they have they're limited in their vocabulary because they're learning the language. I have a limited Russian proficiency. I speak no Russian. So if I went there, they'd say, you're LRP, you're limited Russian proficiency. So we don't use those terms. We just call them English learners. I used to call them all the time English language learners, but there's a tendency to shrink acronyms, to get them smaller and smaller so they're not so long. I don't know if BICS and CALPS are going to go that way. But I use ESL a lot of the time when I refer to the ESL teacher, English second language. English as a second language, sometimes we play games of that. Now, the TESOL, that name of this class, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, is the original name for the organization. We'll be talking about organizations in this class too. But that's an international organization. We have regional organizations that are kind of like children of the parent organization, TESOL. In this area, we have Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska, and they're in an organization called Mid-TESOL, like Midwest, Mid-TESOL. Okay, so I wanted to kind of go over those basic ones. I've got a couple of things here. I do have here's some other ones here. Terms used, I'm just skipping around in here because the highlights. We got language proficiency, which deals with, if you talk about that, normally you have some assessment instrument. Language dominance, that deals with languages when you have kids that speak 2 or 3 languages and which language is more dominant. Sometimes it's almost a tie. So you'll have kids that speak both English and Spanish. And then you'll have this weird situation where kids don't have one dominant language. They actually are not particularly comfortable in either language if they speak 2 languages, which is kind of a tragedy because you do need to be dominant. I believe you need to be dominant in at least one language, if not more. But you need to be, like when I think most of the time, I don't think in Spanish. I speak Spanish, but not that perfectly. And so when I think to myself, when you talk aloud to yourself, I do it in English. And emotionally, that's the language when I was a child. So if I get hurt or something, I don't cuss in Spanish, I cuss in English. Or I'm emotional, if I'm emotional about something and I'm just soaking in either I'm very happy or something, I don't express my glee or my pain in another language. I do it in English. Okay, the FEP, LEP, and I've already mentioned LEP is kind of off limits. We don't use that. But you may run into FEP, LEP, or NEP. So you should know those. And I also put ELPA 21, which is the official Nebraska assessment instrument if you're a student in Nebraska. Wherever you are, you're going to have generally have some kind of a state exam that the state is mandated how they try to track the level of success as your students, as your English language learners or English learners, how well they do in school so that they're more included. The general government policy has been to push to get those students to be more proficient in English and therefore be able to be successful in regular classes. So they try to measure that now. It used to be that ESL kids or English learners, I made that mistake, English learners were literally not tested. They were kind of just out here and they were ignored. And inclusiveness and government laws and has pushed that so that you cannot ignore them. I can tell you stories from Oklahoma years ago where I knew a school where they got English learners. They called them ELLs or whatever. I'm going to go back and forth on those terms. And they actually put them into a separate room and got somebody to watch them and give them something to do. They did not give them instruction. Okay, I know the town that happened in. And it was horrible. Their attitude was, we're just waiting for these kids' parents to leave so we can get them out of here. So you can imagine, talk about discrimination and bias and bigotry and all that. So, and you still have a few people that attitude. I won't say who. Okay, I also put a little bit in here about laws impacting English language learners. I actually teach a class on this summer. I'm not going to have you memorize these, but I put just the basic things in here. One of them is that you have to get the parents' consent to test them for English second language services and to put them in such services. The parents have to agree to that. Otherwise, the kids go in regular classroom. There are also laws like the Civil Rights Law of 64, Equal Education Act of 74, and a couple of court cases that are the basis for English learners have the right to be educated in school, and you're expected to provide them with a program where they can succeed. Now, I can tell you right now, that type of program, and I've already listed those on the chart, and I've got some of them here again, that type of program is up to the school, and just about anything that has ever been used to teach English as a second language could be used by the school, and they could claim that is how we're going to handle English language learners. It doesn't mean it'll be the best program. One area that I think you need to be very careful about and think about is, does your school use a program that does not benefit English language learners? I'm not talking about the regular students, that too, if you have kids in school. But the hat feels pretty good. Nothing like being tacky, huh? But English language learners often get stuck into weird programs that are supposed to help them. And the government almost never does anything or complains or investigates, or even, you have to do the right thing by your English language learners in your school. And you have to get that across to your administrators and everybody else in the school, that you want to provide materials that the students can, so they're able to make progress and you can measure. If the school adopts a program that you feel does not work, you may have no option but just to deal with that program. You don't get to, school board says this is the program we're going to use, or your district person, whatever. That puts you in a bad way, because you may say, this isn't working. We got this reading program. It's not working for English language learners, or even other students for that matter. But you as a teacher, you can advocate and you can argue against it. But you're also, you could be, you could lose your job if you don't play ball. So I just lay that out there. This is very true. It's an issue. And finally, I also am going to include, and I don't want to make a separate video because you don't want to see this hat again, but I have some things here, just a little bit about English learners in the public schools. I found some information, the latest information for 2019, and it has a nice chart. It shows increases in percentage of, this is 2016, the percentage of public school students who were ELL or ELs in the fall of 2016. I guess that's the last time they checked. You can see that in California, 20% of the public school students were English learners. So if you ever guess, people say, well, why would you need an ESL endorsement? It's right here, my friends. 7% in Nebraska, 10% in Florida, 17% in Texas. And now West Virginia is very tiny, 0.9%, less than 1%. But then you'll go up and you'll look in Kansas, 11%, Colorado, 11.7%. And these are just the percentage of, and it varies a lot, but 6 to 8% all over the East Coast. And even in the Deep South, even in states that are considered not as strong, you still have up to 3%. And that's where you make your money as an ESL teacher. One thing I've really enjoyed about ESL is that people leave you alone and let you teach. Even with this hat, but you have a lot of freedom, and with that freedom comes the pleasure of to be able to create your own program. I call it freedom to teach. So that's just what I wanted to say about this and this chart, and you can look at the public. I'm just providing that as basic information to you. Everything I'm giving you, you should download it and keep it as the videos are so valuable with me. But the download the handouts and stuff. You may use this later when you're talking to your fellow teachers, or you're talking to a principal, and you say, we need to do this, we need to do that, and then you can show there's evidence. Or if you have a student who wants to get an ESL undergraduate endorsement here at UNK or someplace, English second language, there's a real shortage of teachers. It takes a special person. It takes a person who is, attributes, loves culture, loves a challenge, but that's a very general term. But when I say loves a challenge, they enjoy interacting with a program where things are new each day. I've talked to special education teachers, and they like the challenge because they don't just have a type of student they're going to have. They know there's a wide variety of situations and types of people and skills they'll have. And they enjoy going and having to adapt day to day and work on that. And that's what you get with English language learners. You can have very educated, they don't speak English, but they're brilliant. You can have students that have behavioral problems. You can have students that have struggled, who are probably the finest human beings you'll ever meet in your life. Students that go through the school system, they start out, people think, oh, that person's never going to be able to graduate high school. And they turn out and they become a college professor, or they become I read a young lady from, was it Lexington or Grand Island, but it was somewhere in the state. A few years ago, she got accepted at Harvard, and she was not documented. That was before the Dreamer program was initiated. And, that's all in controversy now. So when you're an advocate and you teach ESL and English learners, English language learners, you're going to find yourself dealing with all kinds of situations and getting to know the family. You're not just teaching a subject. You never are with a student. You're teaching the family. You're building your community, and I think that makes it so much more exciting. And you kind of fly by the seat of your pants a little bit. I can tell you, when I first started in ESL, it was me and the students, myself and the students, and I had to come up with stuff, even if I had to make it myself if we didn't have the materials. Because, and since I'd taught Spanish, I'd done some language instruction, and it allowed me to experiment. Now, I may share some of those ideas with you, if something you're interested in trying. Okay, I'm going to shut up now because I wanted to keep this fairly short.